Good afternoon. Slightly after time. We'll say we started at 2 o'clock. So welcome to the Audit and Governance Committee. A few items of housekeeping before we transact the business of the day. We're not expecting any fire alarm testing, so should the alarm sound, then it's properly genuine, so please vacate and follow the emergency and fire procedures laid down by the Council House. When addressing the meeting, please put your microphone on and switch it off after use. All mobile phones should either be switched off or put on silent mode. And because we are in the Warspite room, we are on candid camera, so I'm obliged to read the following paragraph to you. This meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of subsequent repeat viewing. By entering the Warspite room and during the course of the meeting, councillors are consenting to being filmed and to the use of those recordings for webcasting. It's great to see members of the public today, and I trust you enjoy the meeting. Right, we shall take item number 1 on the agenda, which is apologies. Unfortunately, our independent member, Mrs. Annette Benny, cannot be with us today. So apologies to be. And any further apologies? I'll come on to that next. Take item number 2 on the agenda, which is a declaration of interest. Does anybody have aught to declare? No. Moving on to item number 3 of the agenda, the minutes of the previous meeting, which I have before me, which was dated the 28th of November 2022. The minutes have been circulated and you'll find in your pack. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? Vice Chair?
No.
Do we all deem them correct?
Agreed.
Excellent. Moving on to item number 4, Chair's urgent business. I do have an item to bring to the committee under this heading. It is with deep regret that Mr. Ian Shipperley, our independent member, one of our independent members, has tendered his resignation. Mr. Shipperley brought a wealth of experience from outside world to the committee, and he served on this committee for 3 years. So perhaps we ought to drop him a line, a note of thanks for his service. I'm just going to pause for one moment and just ask a quick question. As we have no independent members at all, is this committee meeting still quorumed?
Yes, you might remember, Chair, that last year the terms of reference were adjusted so the meeting would be quorate without independent members. And just on the subject of Ian Shipley, we will be seeking to identify and recruit a replacement for Ian Shipley, so that having 2 independent members, which I think is we established as good practice last year, we will continue with that process.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Vice Chair, anything I need to add to that?
No, I'm content with that, Chair. Thank you, Giles.
Thank you. Taking item number 5 on the agenda, we have the external audit progress report, and I believe, do we have to present? Is it? It's going to be Justine. Thank you.
Hello, Chair. This is our progress report for the audit, and it covers a couple of years. So it talks about the 1920 audit, which is still ongoing because we're actually awaiting the outcome of the work that Devon Pension are doing on the Miel transaction. So actually the audit work has been complete, apart from the work that needs to be done on the Miel transaction. We need to have the latest proposal from, the council needs to have the latest proposal from Devon Pension Fund, and we need to consult our council on that. In terms of the 2021 accounts, we have begun that audit, so we began that just before Christmas, and working through the figures with officers, and that's expected to continue for the next couple of months. And then in terms of 21-22, we're looking to complete that audit in the summer of 2023. As you know, we've completed our 2021 and 21-22 value for money work. And that report went to the council's meeting last month. And what we would like is an action plan detailing what actions you're going to take on the 14 recommendations raised. So that's us essentially where we are on the three sets of accounts. What we are doing is working with officers because officers will be preparing the 22-23 accounts in April, May this year. So what we are working to is a quicker timetable so that eventually by 2024 we will be caught up, hopefully, in terms of being able to deliver an annual audit within the statutory deadline of the 30th of September each year. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you for that comprehensive report. I have an initial observation. I mean, back to the 2019-2020 accounts and the sign-off on that. I understand that we're still waiting the resolution on the pension transaction. Is there an update with regard to the valuing of the infrastructure assets, which there was some legislation afoot which should have been passed by now?
Yes, that legislation has been passed. That was passed on the 25th of December. So it's just a temporary solution that SIPFA has proposed and it's been accepted. So the figures in the accounts have been put through. But then this just defers the the more complex accounting for highways assets for another couple of years.
Thank you very much. Any questions, members? Councillor Lowry.
You referred to the 14 items outstanding. Is there a progress report on actions against each of those 14 items? I'm almost tempted to refer to David in response as opposed to yourself, because it's from the council as opposed to yourself. Where are we and what's the timeline around that action plan, please?
My understanding was that report was being taken to the, is it the Budget Committee, Budget and Scrutiny Working Panel?
Chair.
Yes.
If I press the right button through, Chair. Thank you. So the recommendation from this committee the last time we met was to take the report as it stood through to the Scrutiny Committee, which starts in a couple of weeks, so that will happen. In terms of the 14-point action plan, I did put some initial very quick thoughts to that as part of that report, and quite right, you've come back and asked for a bit more detail, so we're working through that. I think at the moment my focus is on this Miel transaction, and once we get that one sorted, that will unlock a lot of the other items on there, but we're working through it, Chair.
Excellent. Appreciate the update on that one. Any more questions, observations or comments?
I ask that, in respect of what David's just said, that action plan and the progress against it is included on the agenda for our next meeting, please.
That's an excellent idea. Can we arrange it? Thank you very much. Anything else before we move on? Okay, item number 6 on the agenda was going to be a discussion of the audit plan, the update, but that is not on the agenda now. It's still undergoing some work. So I will move on to item number 7 of the agenda, which is a meaty financial document, the Midterm Treasury Management Report. And that's going to be Mr. Oh, it's going to be Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Apologies, this document came out a few days late. It's on your to follow pack, and it covers from pages 1 onwards. This is a mid-year Treasury Management Report to comply with SIPFA requirements to produce at least 2 reports in the year, mid-year one and an outturn one, which obviously will be later in the calendar year. The purpose of the report is to update the committee with progress and changes since the 1st of April, and go through our main prudential or compliance with the prudential indicators. So taking your going through the main report, page 5, we use Arling Close to provide treasury management advice, and we have taken a lot of their detailed information around the external context of the current financial situation and economic background. Obviously, it makes reference to the impact of the Ukraine war, the global inflation, and the increased Bank of England rate, which at the end of September was at 2.25%. Obviously, there's been subsequent increases to that, so it's currently standing at 3.5%. We talk about the uncertainty with the increasing demand and pressure with inflation and with disposable incomes being squeezed and higher energy bills coming through, having a further impact. If I take you to page 7, I'm going to focus on the table here, and at the 31st of March 2022, the council had net borrowing of 5.54 million. This was also reported at a previous audit and governance committee when the outturn report was produced. This then follows into the following page and the following table, giving a summary of the council's borrowing at the 31st of March and its movement to the 30th of September. The key thing to note is the increase in the reduction in our borrowing. We've been at the end of 2021. We still held cash balances from transferring our short-term borrowing into long-term PWLB borrowing, so we were able to use those cash balances to reduce our short-term borrowing primarily, which was mainly to deal with the risk associated with the increasing interest rates that we protected revenue budgets from. Investment income, our interest rates at the time, PWLB, we were able to secure some quite low rates in 21-22 that's brought our average down. On this, on table 2, it does show relatively low short-term borrowing rates, but the levels that we're currently being exposed to are closer to 4%, taking out new short-term borrowing in the latter part of the year. LOBO loans, they continue they've been established for quite a few years. We were expecting the LOBO loans to be called in as the interest rates were increasing. However, the one that was due for potential calling in November wasn't called in, so we have got another group of LOBO loans that are due for calling at the end of March. So we'll continually review that situation, but with the LOBO loans, we only have 4 days to repay them, so we have to be quite tight with our cash balances to make sure we can cover that. And then long-term borrowing is again a fixed long-term arrangement we've had mainly with Barclays. So taking you over the page again, this just reiterates the information on the previous page and the action we've taken. That's, as I say, the council did increase its PWLB borrowing in April by 75 million, which it used to reduce its short-term borrowing, and the rate secured with that was just under 2.5%. So it was done to protect the interest rate risk. Over on page 10, it details the movement between our investments, and we've reporting a net change of 83 they're reducing the balance to 83 million, so a net change of 18, and that was mainly with reduction with our the cash holdings we held, which again had also got used to cover off the maturing short-term borrowing as it became due. Then, taking it on to table 5 on page 12. As I mentioned, there has been action trying to sort of protect the interest rate risk through increasing PWLB borrowing, and obviously with the interest rate impact on borrowing is also a positive impact on the interest we receive. So we're anticipating to
Sorry, could I interrupt? Councillor Evans would like to interject.
Apologies, Chair, it's just the table that I was not understanding. Is that all right? On page?
So the one on page 12, the one with the prudential indicators, or
No, it was actually page 10. The investments table. Yeah. It's just that in the total column at the row at the bottom, it has increase / open brackets decrease close brackets in investments £1 million, and then in the actual numbers column it has a -18, which is not in brackets. Does that mean then that is not minus but plus, or does it actually mean plus? Or does it mean minus?
it should be bracket. It should have brackets, not
And no minus?
No minus.
Right, okay. And that's true for all of the figures in the movement column, is it?
Yes.
Right.
I'll get that corrected.
I just wanted you to know I was auditing.
thank you, Councillor Evans.
It's all right.
Please continue. Thank you.
It's on page 12. As mentioned, we've taken action with PWLB, taking out long-term PWLB, Public Work Loan Board borrowing to protect the interest rate risk that we'd be exposed to through short-term borrowing with other local authorities. And the sort of the table, if we take it in 3 parts, the interest payable has increased above the amount budgeted for, but this has been compensated by the interest we've received through our pooled investments and the money market funds that we hold with our sort of day-to-day cash holdings. So that's been a, let's say, the increase in investment has protected the council's risk there, and there have been 30 further savings made primarily with our debt management, which is where we have broker charges for taking out short-term borrowing. So by moving across to longer-term PWLB, we've again reduced the cost, and the net overall impact is a revenue saving of just over 200,000 that's been reported at month 6 monitoring, end of September. So that's the main talk of tables, and then from page 13 is the key point where we're tracking our compliance against prudential indicators, and without repeating them, we've complied with all our investment limits, our operational boundaries, our authorised limits, and our investment portfolio level. And yeah, that's the main prudential indicators we're reporting on.
Thank you. So looking at the report then, in terms of the prudential indicators, we comply with all. the only bit I don't understand is 14.3, the table at the top where it says complied, there's a cross in the upper limit.
Right, yes,
Fixed
sorry, I
interest.
have that page on my printout, which is a bit silly. That is complying with where we've increased the level of fixed term borrowing. So there was expected to be a more of a spread between fixed and variable, but in light of the changes and the increase with Bank of England rates, we've taken an approach to tie in more debt fixed term to protect those increases.
Thank you. One other point, I'm not sure whether it's you or David would kindly answer this one. There's 9.6. I mean, we all appreciate that in times of economic crisis that gilts and bonds are actually the favoured low risk investment. I don't fully understand the implications of the third line, the sell-off in gilts. Is that when the government was buying in gilts, it affected the market?
Yeah, I think that was the action that was taken to address some of the pension risk with the investments.
Any questions, comments? Vice Chair.
Just for the record, I think it's worth noting that we don't have any investment in any non-UK banks, because that question was asked of us previously, so it's worth just putting that on the record. Also, we should say a very well done to the team for taking the very shrewd investment into the Public Loan Work Board in transferring some short-term debt to long-term debt to the tune of £75 million, because that's going to be of a huge benefit to the council going forward. So well done for that. A couple of questions, please. What has been the net impact, if you can't supply the information here and now, at a later date would be fine, of the substantial increase in interest rates from the September time, and how that will affect our budget for the next 12 months, please? So I'd like to understand how much extra money we're going to have to pay in interest rates as a consequence of interest rates changing from 2.75% to in excess of 4%, please, for the next financial year. Just for clarity, how much money do we approximately have in the bank at the moment? And also, you mentioned LOBOs. Obviously, we'd be very keen to address any outstanding debt that we do have on our LOBOs, and I'd be keen to explore that. You do say we get a 4-day window, which is would allow us to make a decision very quickly, and we need to make sure that the team involved in that have the necessary approvals for that to take place. So we might wish to delegate that responsibility to the Chair and Vice Chair, along with the Cabinet Member for Finance, to make those decisions as and when they occur. And I know officers would probably want members' engagement in that as well, please.
Right. There have been, referring to the questions in order, there have been actions taken to include a provision in the medium-term financial planning for interest rate risk, but as to put a figure on it, I'll provide you with some more information afterwards. The LOBO arrangements, we will review them and speak with our advisors, are in close to look at what opportunities we have. At the moment, it is the lender's option to call them in. So obviously, if they did call them in, we would take their hands off and pay up. But because they have been predominantly quite high interest rate for quite a few years, but we'll review that. Like I say, there have been some LOBOs called in, but ours hasn't been. And did that cover your main questions?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Just on the LOBOs, though.
Yes.
What I'm saying is, I want members involved in that decision-making process, please.
Okay. Yeah.
And I know it's an option that exists for them, but in the past we have had the opportunity to encourage them to come to the table. So if that opportunity does exist, we should create it and make it happen, please.
Yeah.
We're willing.
We're willing.
Yes. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Evans.
So just to be absolutely clear about the request for information, we're talking about the period that immediately followed the fiscal event so-called fiscal event, which was a budget and then it wasn't a budget, it was a fiscal event, I think it was referred to by Mr. Quartain's doings, right? So that was quite a while ago now. So I'm not just curious about this, I think we should know exactly, you know, what it has done to our financial prospects in this current year, as well as what it will do in subsequent years. Because the amount of money that it apparently has cost the UK economy is eye-watering. And I cannot believe that this council, along with other local authorities around the council, around the country, have been insulated from that. So it would be, I think, you know, not just idle curiosity. I think the public has a right to know, as do we.
Totally agree, and also the involvement of the chair and vice chair and others, that would be very much appreciated. Is there any other questions or comments or observations on this item? In which case, thank you very much for the detailed report, and it's noted by this committee. Moving on to item number 8 on the agenda, which is the disclosure and barring checks for councillors, which you will find at pages 17 to 26 in your pack. And I believe, Mr. Jago, you've been allocated to speak on this paper.
I have been allocated, Chair. Thank you very much. DBS, the role of DBS is to help employers make safe recruitment decisions and prevent unsuitable people working with vulnerable groups. We've tried a couple of times now to get a policy agreed by this committee, and since our last discussion, we've reconsidered the policy in light of comments made by members at the time. And what we've done is started with the law and built our policy from there. We've also held a training session for elected members back in December, relatively well attended. I think we're going to do another one quite soon. That provided councillors with the legal framework within which DBS checks operate and the differing levels of check and what they may contain. So just a quick reminder, there are 4 levels of DBS checks available. There's the basic check, which anybody can apply for, and they can apply for that online. There's a standard check, an enhanced check with a barring list, and one without a barring list. Now, of those 4 levels of checks, two could be applicable to members. So that would be the enhanced check without a barring list check and the basic DBS check. So councillors can be eligible for the enhanced check when they're undertaking specific duties included in the Rehabilitation of Offenders Act, the relevant exceptions order and the Police Act 1997. And to be eligible, what they need to be doing is performing a role which makes decisions upon social services functions for the authority. So that's essentially regulated activity. Now, in line with those eligibility requirements for the enhanced, that the cohort of members that would be affected would be those sitting on the corporate parenting group, because essentially they are undertaking the council's statutory function as corporate parents via that committee, and the cabinet, because they have the direct decision making around the delivery of social care services. So those would be the only positions open to that enhanced check. So the second check applicable to members would be the basic check. Now, there is no eligibility requirements under the law for this check, and councillors will be able to make their own application. Now, we have not included within this policy mandatory DBS checks or basic DBS checks for councillors, because the law would prevent us from enforcing that mandatory check. We wouldn't be able to enforce it. So essentially we could ask all members, and members are well within their rights to refuse us. Also, just reflecting on our last session, we've looked again at the Lord Mayor and what the Lord Mayor should be, what sort of check the Lord Mayor may need to have. Now, Previously, they have been subject to DBS checks because of their contact with young people and vulnerable groups. Now, we've reviewed the law against what the Lord Mayor actually does. And as the Lord Mayor does not provide a service which is wholly or mainly for vulnerable groups, the position would be deemed to have an incidental contact with vulnerable groups and therefore would not be eligible for any other check other than a basic check. Again, we would be unable to mandate the Lord Mayor to undertake a DBS check of that nature, so it's not been included within the policy. Now, it may well be that political groups could mandate basic checks for their members, but that's entirely dependent on your rules. And of course, what we would be happy to do is maintain a database of that and display it on the councillors' profiles if that's what you wished us to do. But currently, we don't have a proposal for basic checks on all councillors, as we'd be unable to enforce it. So those are the main changes in the policy as it sits before you now. Happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jago. I mean, in summary then, I mean, looking at sections 6.2 and 6.4, that summarises the entire groups which will be eligible for enhanced DBS checking. And if we look at 5.1, should somebody have a DBS, enhanced DBS check carried out, and that's stored, there is a limit to who can view that report. Am I right in saying that that's limited to, well, who would it be limited to? Could I answer that question?
Chief Exec, myself and the monitoring officer.
Thank you. Open for discussion, ladies and gents.
Chair, just
Mr. Lowe.
picking up on the very last point, even if you were in receipt of that information, what would you be able to do with it?
If there was an issue around safety, then we would need to remove that person from a role. So if it's an enhanced check, we've got information within that check which we deem to be a risk to a vulnerable person, then that councillor would need to be removed from that, well, likely removed from that role, because it would prevent them undertaking the prescribed duties under the Act.
So I'm right in saying that this committee can gain assurance that this will be carefully monitored, and should there be a risk, immediate action would be taken.
Absolutely, Chair.
Councillor Evans.
As usual, it's just semantics, I'm afraid, but I mean, we were having a conversation about this last week and trying to work out how that information could be shared and who with. So I'm just trying to work out now, you said that the person who would know would be you, Chief Executive and the monitoring officer. Presumably the person who had the DBS check as well would know. Yeah. But there's no obligation. So how does this then all of a sudden, right, here I am happily going along and all of a sudden I'm removed from something. So what is the procedure by which you remove? Because most appointments in here are made by political groups subject to the privilege of the council in certain circumstances, but not in every circumstance. So I'm just trying to work out, you know, at what point do you let the group whips know or the leader of the group? Or because the way I read this is they wouldn't have the right to know. So that was what I was trying to work out, really. If you can't tell anybody, all of a sudden, you know, you're disappeared.
Mr. Perrick.
I hesitate to leap into the conversation that Ross was leading.
Yeah.
Clearly, the legislation is designed for prospective employers.
Yes.
And the idea is that checks would be undertaken prior to appointment.
Wouldn't happen in our case, would it?
We are here and doing our best to interpret the law designed for employers into a field of appointment. Now, we're not unique because obviously trustees of boards of organisations that had responsibilities that are also regulated by the disbarring legislation would also be in. So we're not unique as local authorities, but it is designed for employers. A process could be designed, which I think would be potentially a tad cumbersome, where a leader, for example, with responsibility for appointing a cabinet, would consult with would inform prospective cabinet members of the requirement to have a enhanced check prior to appointment, and that would be cleared prior to the appointment. Now, traditionally, the leader exercises their discretion in appointing a cabinet, and those checks would follow on. So it's a slightly different situation than our employment situation, and I think the process that would be gone through would be that a conversation would take place, I think, between the chief executive, potentially and the monitoring officer, and the appointing member, who would be the leader in the case of the cabinet, where the sensitivities of that issue would be discussed, and there'd be an option to address that situation based on the information that had been disclosed. So it's not entirely straightforward, because the leader isn't the employer, but the council would be, those executive functions would be being undertaken by that individual.
I don't want to prolong this agony, Chair, right?
But it's important.
But well, I mean, this is it's that thing around pure and applied, isn't it? So in this case, right, the leader has a scheme of delegation, which is the appointment of the cabinet, right? You don't need a DBS enhanced until you become a cabinet member. Before you become a cabinet member, you're not entitled, according to this policy, you don't need one. You only need one once you have been. So, in other words, you won't find out whether somebody is a wrong one or not, if I could use those phrases. I'm sure there's a better one, until they actually have been appointed and announced publicly that that is the case. So I suppose what I'm asking is, the way you've written this policy doesn't allow us to discreetly investigate whether somebody has a record or not before they're appointed. What we are pitching them straight into is shame. And in this case, it might be somebody who's just about to have their, have served their time, if I could put it like this, because this isn't necessarily prison or anything like that. I mean, this should be an offence, which is time served, right? So, like I say, I don't want to make heavy weather of this, but I just wondered whether we've thought through in terms of discretion. Just want to put on the record, I'm not interested in hiding away anybody who's done the business, because the last thing we want is to have that happen, right, and expose members of the public to something. But what I am saying is, there's an opportunity here for us to do some preparatory work, which the way this policy is tightly written doesn't necessarily allow us to do that without subjecting somebody who's being in position from then being out of position. The other issue, which is a wider issue, is who needs to know. As I say, you know, like we're a bit like gossipy in politics, right? So all of a sudden, right, you've got somebody who's not in a cabinet, but in one of these positions, and all of a sudden they are not. Now, normally you'd have a press release, wouldn't you, and say Councillor X has decided to go on a very long cruise, or for work reasons has moved to Gloucester, or whatever it would be. But in this case, it would appear that you can't reveal the reasons why somebody all of a sudden have lost their position on a specific committee. Again, I'm not trying to cause a fuss, but I just want to know how the council would handle that if it can't tell anybody. I mean, are we in, because it's an unusual event. Somebody was appointed and then unappointed quite shortly. And I'll leave that with you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Evans. I think it probably would be sensible for us to write an addendum to the policy in terms of how it's going to run for a process. So if that would be helpful, we can look to create that in conjunction with this committee and publish it alongside the policy as an addendum.
In consultation with those two?
Absolutely, Chair.
All right.
I think that's a sensible solution. And another thing to note as well, if we implement the policy, it can be reviewed after 6 months, can't it?
Absolutely, Chair, yeah.
Is the committee in favour of that? Yes, all in favour.
Thank you.
So we therefore will note the report and subject to that. We'll agree, yes, sorry. We'll agree the report, Mr. Jago. Thank you, and thank you for all your hard work involved in preparing that report and subject to that addendum. Thank you. Okay, that clears off item number 8 on the agenda. We move on to item number 9, which is the Strategic Risk Monitoring Report and Risk Management Scrutiny Update, which I believe, Ross, is you again, is it?
It is, Chair, thank you. Usually, we don't see a massive amount of change over the course of a month in the strategic risk register. There's been a slight change since our last meeting in November. So our total strategic risks we're managing now have moved down from 20 to 18. 5 of those risks have a rating of red, and those relate to the council's expenditure, the growing volume and complexity of demand on the children, young people and family service, IT supply chain constraints, cyber attacks, and the city's economic performance. I mentioned that we've reduced the overall from 20 to 18. 2 risks have been identified as sufficiently mitigated and been moved to the operational risk register. Those are the council not meeting its obligation to keep data secure by failing to adhere to Data Protection Act regulations. It's been quite a lot of work led by Andy Ralph's team to get training and development out there for staff members on GDPR requirements. It's been a feature of our briefing over the last couple of months. So mitigations are in place, and it's considered that's now moved into the operational register. Obviously, that doesn't mean that the risk is now forgotten. It means that it's being addressed within departments. And the council not meeting its legal obligation regarding the health, safety and wellbeing of his workforce. That one's been moved down into the operational register. It is still under review, and throughout the operational register, which is appended to this report, you'll see where those risks are being reviewed. They're actually being reviewed, I think, probably right about now with the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Officers Group. So they're currently being looked at. There has been a slight increase to risk number 19, which is the risk of failure to deliver the range of housing to meet Plymouth's need. So its risk score increased to 12 from 9, and now appears as amber. I think there's a number of different factors affecting that, including supply chain constraints, workforce, and so on. I can get further information should the committee require it. Risk at scrutiny. Scrutiny continues to receive risk reports at each of its scrutiny meetings. I am seeing the chairs of the scrutiny committees on Wednesday, where this updated report will be a feature of our discussion and will help us plan for the final cycle of committee meetings post-budget scrutiny next week. Chair, committee's asked to note the report. I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Any questions, members? Councillor Evan?
Maybe I've been looking too closely at these, but what is the point of a risk register without any mitigation column on it? Because that's what you're actually measuring, isn't it? I mean, at the end of the day, we can produce a list of alarms and things we're really, really worried about, but actually what we do, the whole purpose of examining risk is that we're in the business of managed risks, right? That's what we do, because everything's a risk. Stepping out the door this morning to come in here was a risk, right? The question is what can we do about it? What have we said we would do about it? And how are we doing against that? That's the bit. And that's not there. To my mind, that's not here.
Isn't it the fact that when something's red alert, once the risk is, yeah, yeah, but then it's mitigated and drops down.
Yes, but there's things that, I mean, the climate emergency stuff, right? I mean, it's interesting, but I don't quite see how a strategic approach is a substitute for doing stuff, right? And where's that assessment, right? I mean, the whole purpose of an action plan, the annual action plan that was in place from when we put it in place, was a 10-year action plan with annual updates and statements and actions to be replaced, according to this, by a strategic, I mean, strategic, right, is local government speak for kicking the can down the road, right? So, again, there's got to be some consideration of why the authority has decided, rather than going for action, it's gone for words, and what the effect of that is. So, I'm forgive me, but there's no real way of at a glance seeing where you're failing, because everything's failing. That can't be right. You must be doing something right, surely. Something must be going right. So again, from my point of view, this is a risk register without purpose.
Through you, Chair.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. We have included mitigation from, so it's included on the table. Sorry, Councillor, you may well have missed it. It's page 34 onwards. That middle column refers to the risk mitigations against each risk.
Forgive me, what we're not seeing at a glance on the risk on the traffic light system is how those mitigations are going.
Right. Through,
I'm trying to
yeah.
say.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair.
Because they are your interventions.
So yeah, absolutely. So those risk scores are the residual risk scores. So that is the score after mitigation. I think we just need to be careful with the traffic light system, because red doesn't mean that we are actually failing. It means there is a risk of us failing in the future, and what we're doing is implementing some of these mitigations as detailed to prevent that risk of failure as much as possible. I'm happy to have a discussion about how this could be rejigged to better serve this committee. Happy to do that, Chair.
Thank you. I mean, also, what you're saying, the salient bit as well, I mean, going through the traffic light system is the salient bit's the scoring, isn't it, in the left-hand column, or should I say the right-hand side, first left. Is that the salient bit we should be looking at?
I try to keep these reports as user-friendly, thank you, Chair, as possible. So to be honest, I would like you all to read every part of that risk to understand what its impact might be. But if there's further information required here, Chair, happy to go away and make sure that's included in future reports.
Mr. Perrott.
Chair, with uncanny prescience, Councillor Evans has actually flagged one of the recommendations that Grant Thornton made that were referred to earlier in this meeting that will be the subject of the action plan that the Vice Chair asked to return to this area, which is that the Council's audit function, and I think by extension scrutiny, should pay much closer attention to the tracking the mitigations that the Council's put in place to manage its risk. How extraordinary that the finger would be on the pulse in quite that way. And it was a lot better for me to mention this today than for Tudor to discover it when he read the action, when he read the 14 recommendations at some point in the future. So actually, there'll be a degree of detail on this, I think, as we respond to the Grant Thornton recommendation. What we're anxious to avoid doing, and there'll be I think the council is receiving the net zero action plan at its meeting in possibly February around the climate withdrawal. And I don't want to get into that debate now, but I think it's an attempt to bring together the carbon reduction plan with the climate emergency action plan into a more manageable document. So that requirement is still absolutely there. What we'd like to avoid is where there is an action plan in place, to not replicate it into the mitigations on for risk management purposes. But I think Councillor Evans has just flagged up a key issue here about how progress against delivering the mitigations at a strategic level is monitored, and that is really within the terms of reference of this committee. And I think it is incumbent on us to introduce, without making this more complicated, introduce a way that we can update the committee about our progress in delivering the mitigation, which I think is the point that was being made. And as I say, this has been flagged up by Grant Thornton as part of their annual audit. So the views of both Councillor Evans and Grant Thornton are entirely congruent, which is not always the case. So it's wonderful that it is on this occasion.
No, it pains me to say it. Congratulations, Councillor Evans. So, is there any other observations or comments to make on this item before I conclude this bit? Because we certainly note the work to date, so we note the report, and we will obviously pay some attention into making that work as Councillor Evans and Grant Thornton suggest. Thank you. That brings us on to tracking, which is item number 10 on the agenda. So let us consider the resolutions from previous meetings and look at the tracked changes on that, which you'll find on pages 53 to 56 of your pack. So I think we're all in agreement. We have completed the actions for that item. So it brings us on to the last item of the agenda, item number 10, which is the work programme, and for members to discuss any items in the work programme and to note the work programme to date. You'll find that in pages 59 and 60 as well.
Through you, Chair, if we could just bring councillors' attention to the proposal for the electrical cycle consultation task and finish group as part of the work programme. Oh, you're going to take it separate. Excuse me. Thank you, Chair.
So clearing off that side of it, you're absolutely right. It is an item of work. Sorry, Councillor Larry?
We're referring to the work programme for the remainder of the calendar year, or the financial year, sorry. Municipal year, in fact. So the last meeting is the 20th of March, and I just wanted to make sure that all the issues that we kind of said we wanted to get done by the end of this municipal year, we've managed to squeeze into at least this final meeting. I know the Code of Conduct review that we did in respect of members, which was very, very time consuming, we did make some recommendations, and those recommendations are included in this meeting on the 20th of March. Is that my understanding? Which is review of the Council Officers Code of Conduct and a review of arrangements for dealing with complaints through the Code of Conduct.
That's correct, Chair.
And I'm making this up as I'm going along now. I have something in my head about some IT policy that we are also going to review.
So that one remains to be scheduled at the moment.
So I wasn't dreaming it then.
You weren't dreaming it.
It's
No.
at the bottom of the page too.
It's at the bottom of the page.
Oh, right, there it is.
I think there is possibility you could include that at the final meeting of the year, Chair. It will just require some time management, I should expect, as we go through the meeting.
Excellent. We shall duly table that. Totally agree with that. So in terms of the main body of that item, we then come down to the 11.1 or whatever it is, 10.1. This is the election cycle review. This committee obviously met at an EGM on the 5th of September of last year and agreed the way forward, which was then duly endorsed by full council last time. We now come on to the substance of the matter, which is putting together the questionnaires, deciding who we consult. So I do believe, Mr. Jago, you would like to take us through the final stages of this, or was it you, Giles?
Happy to, Chair. I think it's relatively straightforward. It's just delivering on the recommendations of this committee when it last met, actually, which was both the question and the arrangements should be the subject of agreement to group of members. Obviously, given the membership of this group is quite small, there is a suggestion that we try and engage, given that the final issue will be debated by full council, that we give an opportunity for the membership to be expanded to include all groups, and hopefully on the report you can see how that's set out with the appropriate proportionality being in place as well. So in effect, there's nothing new being suggested here. It's just making sure, a bit as you said, Councillor Larry, we get this sorted before the end of the municipal year, so that we've delivered what we were asked to by the end of the year, and we're happy to engage with group leaders and the chair and vice chair to put that in place, and there's some suggested dates for the meeting.
Excellent. Yes, I mean the time frame, if we are going to get this done properly, I mean the time frame you put in the report makes perfect sense. One question I was going to ask with this as well, but yes, I understand we should have cross-party representation. Ought we include because Mrs. Benny did want to be involved in the process. I haven't spoken to her subsequently. Should an independent member of this committee also be part of the working group? Just a thought.
I look to Councillors Tofan and Larry, a brief nod, and we would put that in place. It doesn't sound like a die in a ditch issue to me.
No, absolutely not. I would agree though. This is a complex issue, and it might be useful, dare I say, to have somebody in the room who's not a politician, and Turkey's voting for Christmas. So I would support that recommendation. Yes.
Fantastic. We'll make it so.
Yes, certainly. All approved. Any other questions or observations on?
Sorry,
Sorry,
Chair. This is an important issue, and Councillor Evans is briefly had to pop out. So, and we'll be coming back in. I just would like to get all members fully signed up to the dates and the proposed membership list as set out here. And I mean, it would appear that it's our intention to complete this exercise by the end of this year. So, can we come back to it as an item to sign off once Councillor Evans has joined us, because he'll be proposing the Labour members and not myself on this occasion.
We will hold fire and await his return. Councillor Evans, just for your benefit, we've gone through the report for the election cycle review. In in paragraph 3, we have a time scale for the the working group to prepare the initial proposals, then review, timeframe, getting it right through the process, membership of the working group in order to get all cross-party representations. Going to be 2 Labour members, 2 Conservative members, 1 Green Party member, 1 Independent Alliance member. I've suggested a small amendment to that, whereby the independent member that sits on this committee, who has expressed an interest in being involved in the process, I haven't spoken to her subsequently, but she would probably like to join that group as well. So we're now on final sort of comments and on.
Can I just here really, because the Independent Alliance aren't a party. So this is about electoral arrangements, council arrangements, fundamentally. That's the question we're asking the local community, isn't it? I mean, as far as I'm aware, everybody in the Independent Alliance was elected as a Conservative or a Labour, right? One Labour, isn't there? Yeah. And everybody else is a Conservative. I mean, they might call themselves something else, but that's what they were elected at. Now, what I don't understand is how they get to have a say, because these matters are normally by discussion with with the political parties. They're not a political party, are they? They're just a bunch of people who hate everybody else. And I've just wondered whether that is that the right vehicle? Should they have that vehicle?
It's a good point that you
I mean,
raised.
they'd be Conservatives tomorrow if certain things change, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. It's a wider issue, not relating to this specific item of the agenda, but in terms of proportionality across the council committees generally. I think we need a legal standing on that. I think that it is right that whoever forms a group, albeit I take what you say, that they are others people who were in groups before who now renamed themselves, for the want of a better word. I think they're still entitled to be represented on the committees in proportion to their numbers. Is that right, Mr. Jago?
Through you, Chair, yeah, you're absolutely correct. They have formed a group. The 89 Act defines a group as 2 members or more. So the Independent Alliance has formed a group on the council, and therefore, as a group on the council, are included in our proportionality calculations that go to council. However, this is essentially a subcommittee of a parent committee, the audit committee, and therefore it's entirely up to you to either apply or disapply proportionality to any committee that is spawned of it, I guess. But obviously, that group is now 5 members. So, but it's up to you, Chair, as a committee on who you'd wish to take forward.
And just briefly, in addition, it will be this committee as currently constituted that makes a decision on the advice of this working group. So that's thing one. So
be part of it anyway.
they'll report here, and you will make the decision about because it was delegated to you by full council. Thing one. Thing two. This was based on purely the fact that the up sum of the consultation will come back to full council, and this was a suggestion by officers. But as you say, the constitution of the committee is entirely up to the audit committee. The decision made on the advice of this working group will be this committee's as well. You're not delegating them anything apart from a conversation about the questions that, well, you've seen the scope in the report. So, but it's up to you who sits on it, and you will make the decision based on feedback.
So if it's the prerogative of this committee, if we can exclude those members on that working group, if this committee sees fit.
Well, Chair, I'd like to propose that it's 2 Labour members and 2 Conservative members, and we should leave it at that, because that's what this committee currently consists of.
And the lady who sits here.
And the independent member, yeah, that's what this committee consists of. Those other members weren't party to this committee, so I just think it should consist of the 2 Labour members and the 2 Conservative members and the independent member.
I'm personally very happy with that. Do we put it to the vote that we all agree?
Just before you do, sorry, Chair, is Councillor Ellis suggesting that it is in fact these 2, the members of this committee? Because if it was, it would be a bit like nothing wrong with it at all. A bit like the Audit and Governance Committee saying we'll do the work as the work. You're not saying that, okay? Just checking.
I think for clarity purposes, we're going to take paragraph 4.1 of the suggestion. So it'll be 2 Labour members to be decided by that group, 2 Conservative members to be decided by that group, 1 Green. No, that's it. And our independent, not an independent from the Alliance, our independent member in this committee who's expressed an interest and has some knowledge in the subject. Yeah.
That's very clear.
That is the proposal.
Thank you, Chair.
Anything else to add?
Yes.
That was a silly question, wasn't it?
Yes, there is something else. Last week, the government announced that it started the launch of a campaign to make people aware. And I've got to read this because it's what's the word? Complicated. As of last week, the government says in an advertising campaign that people need photo ID to vote at elections from May the 4th onwards, including May the 4th. Now, I don't know whether you've had the difficult job of applying for such a voter authority certificate, which they're called, nice and convenient, voter authority certificate. But although the website works in the sense that there is stuff posted on it, we here are not yet in receipt of the necessary equipment or software to enable it to happen. Neither, as I understand it, is the government able to process anybody who applies through the government website for said voter certificate. Now, why is this important? So we're having a discussion just a minute ago about the frequency of elections and their effect on turnout. This is going to affect turnout. In fact, it's going to affect turnout not amongst all groups of people, but some groups of people. Because this government website says you can use a voter authority certificate to vote in person in some UK elections and referendums. It doesn't say which ones, just says some. So you would not know from reading this government website that you cannot vote in the next council elections here in Plymouth if you don't have photo ID or one of these voter authority certificates. You can apply for a voter authority certificate if you do not have accepted photo ID. The website doesn't say what the accepted photo ID is, but we can tell you, because some of us have already done some work on this, that depending on your age, right, you can, if you are an older person, you can use a Freedom Pass or equivalent. You can use a pensioner's rail card. If you are a young person, you cannot use your young person's rail card as voter ID. That's just one example of the way in which this is not going to allow us to have a free and fair election here in Plymouth or anywhere in the UK. Oh, here's another reason why you might need a voter authority certificate. If you no longer look like the photo on your ID. So does that mean everybody who's grown a beard in order to be in fashion over the last 10 years now needs a different photo ID? Will people who have beards but have clean shaven photo ID be denied a vote at the polling station? Could be the other way around, by the way. You might have had a beard and know you're completely unrecognisable if you don't have one. And then finally, the name on your voter ID is significantly different to your name on the electoral register. So if you've just got married in the last 12 months, for example, and you're not Miss Jones and you married Mr. Jones, will you be refused a vote at the polling station? This is not clear from the government website. Now, why am I raising it now? It's January the 16th, 15th today. The polling is on May 4th. May the 4th. And it will take some time for those voter authority certificates to be processed by the council. Just to give you a rough idea, 2 million people in the UK do not have any form of acceptable voter ID. In Plymouth, that would be the equivalent of about 8,000 people. Now, processing 8,000 voter authority certificates, and they take on average, with all the details in your possession, 8 minutes. would take about 34 weeks to process using one of our 5 electoral registration officers. In other words, even if you applied today, half of the people in Plymouth who applied would not get their voter authority certificate in time to vote in May's elections. I think we need to be very concerned about that, because that is an affront to democracy. It's a threat to democracy, and we need to up our game in telling people about it. I raised this issue last week with the returning officer because the government advertising had started before the week before polling in the Moorview election, and there was no requirement at the Moorview election to show voter ID, thank God. But I asked for there to be some advertising to come out to make sure that people were aware of this. I don't know about you, but I'm on Twitter all the time and I didn't see hardly anything. So I'm worried that the council's performance in advertising the fact that this requirement is out there is clear and present danger to democracy, and it's urgent. And we need to get the message out to our electoral people that their game needs to be raised considerably if we're not to have a problem with the vote in May. And that's got to be a concern for everybody. So I'm raising that now because I don't know where else to raise it. Because if we wait for another council meeting, that's another 2 weeks lost. Can we help, please?
It's a good point. I mean, certainly in terms of this item of the agenda, have no impact because this is due to be implemented in 2026. But I take on board the seriousness of what you're saying, and I think the Election Services Department really need to be focused on this, and perhaps Vice Chair and I will speak to them direct.
Yes, Chair.
I think, given the fact that it doesn't really fit on this item of the agenda, are you happy for the Vice Chair and I to speak to them direct and raise this concern, at least to put into the forefront?
I would like you to write formally to the electoral registration officer, Tracy Lee, and ask her what her plans are for raising this awareness over the next few weeks. And the next few weeks are going to be vital, because you know what will happen otherwise. People will go to the polling station and there could be all sorts of consternation at polling stations if people haven't heard about it or have applied and received it. So what is the cunning plan, Blackadder, I would ask, for making sure that everybody knows about it and is getting on and applying? As I say, my kids don't have the requisite ID. I'm sure there are others that don't.
I think I would be happy, as I say, this is not, we haven't got a caption here, any other business, so it doesn't really fit there. But I am happy as chairman of this committee, seeing that you expressed this concern, and I find it quite concerning as well, that I will contact the chief exec and ask for urgent clarity on this. And I think, given the fact that this is the last item on the agenda and we've actually dealt with the election cycle, we're clear where we're going with the working group and the timeframes involved. I think I can call this meeting to an end at 3:20. Thank you all for attending, and thank you, members of the public. Hope you enjoyed the experience.